Yeah, because people associate pornography use with some kind of like sexual being sex positive. I think it's being sex negative
Mm.
actually, because it teaches children these negative, toxic sexual scripts that don't lead them to having really healthy sexual relationships or relationship when they are older. It just prematurely sexualizes them and then gives them this toxic sexual script about what sex
Mhm.
is. And, um, they've also done studies about the content of pornography and, how much, the percentage of scenes that are violent towards women. And I'm thinking of two different, one that's older said 88% of the scenes were violent towards women, whether that's, you know, verbal or physical
Mhm.
aggression. Um, but when you mix sex and violence, that ups the dopamine in the
Mm.
brain. So men will start watching kind of like vanilla porn, and then they'll quickly go to, a more deviant kind of porn because it becomes an addictive
Yeah.
process. And you're always having to up the ante to get that same level or close to that same level of arousal. And, we're talking about earlier how, there's always been pornography, you see it, ancient Chinese paintings or whatever, you see pornography, yes, but that's not the same animal. It's nothing even like what kids get access to on the internet. And it's, what we're seeing now is full color streaming
Mhm.
video and endless
Yeah.
novelty, which again propels addiction. Endless novelty. The brain loves novelty. I mean, if there's one thing that you can have endless novelty, it's porn. And so that seeking, dopamine is that seeking
Mm.
molecule. And so there's just endless amounts. I mean, even on reels on
Sure.
Instagram, I'll get
Sure.
sucked in, from one to the next. And then my brain just loves, oh, what's the new thing? What's the new thing? What's the next new thing? And so our brains are unfortunately very
Mhm.
vulnerable to this kind of
Mhm.
technology. And when you think about sexual material uh, and children, their brains are not
Right.
ready for to be sexualized. They're not mature enough to make those decisions. They're not ready. And so it's very unfortunate that children have this kind of access.
So,
And there's something we can do about it. I really do believe there's something we can do
well, I
about it.
think even thinking through, if I can quickly try to summarize that sort of like behavioral, loop or like pattern, it would be that you're exposed to something that starts as maybe not particularly deviant. Because what you described, right? If you're imitating something that's more extreme, that is, it would be hard for me to imagine somebody immediately dives into that. Perhaps that happens, right? But you're describing more of this process of kind of going deeper and deeper, which has never been possible before because of the nature of digital media, where we now live in this world where there is a super abundance of information. In this case, incredibly powerful, compelling digital content, especially so to somebody younger who doesn't have a fully formed kind of executive function system. And in order to keep the dopamine, you know, uh, getting it to that point that they originally got it to, they're going to sort of naturally veer into content that could come back offline in very catastrophic ways. So it's that process has never been possible before. Is that the key difference?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, when you think about like, when I was a kid, I saw my dad's Playboy magazines. Okay. Now, I don't think that that was helpful for him. In fact, there's studies that show now that um, if you look at pornography, you're more likely, especially if you and your partner look at pornography, you're more likely, like 3 times more likely than couples that don't look at pornography, to have
Hmm.
infidelity in your relationship. So it just promotes all kinds of things. If you want your kids to grow up and have a chance and having positive, healthy, you know, long term, even monogamous, which are the healthiest and the happiest marriages, then, you got to steer them away from porn and you've got to teach them that porn is going to take them in the opposite direction of loneliness, of
Hmm.
addiction, and even, you know, put them at a higher risk for criminal behavior. Um, so I don't talk about all that in good pictures, bad pictures, but we do explain the process of addiction in clear, simple ways that children can
Hmm.
understand. We talk about the thinking brain and the feeling brain, or another term for that is the wanting
Hmm.
brain. Um, and how those two brains work and which brain needs to be have more
Hmm.
control, which is that thinking brain. But it's the thinking brain, that prefrontal cortex, the executive function, which is immature in kids. So they're far more vulnerable to seeing and being affected by pornography than, an adult that's 25 years old. I mean, if you're 25 years old and you see pornography for the first time, you have so much more ability to think about it rationally, to make
Right.
choices, uh, and not let it get to the point where it's going to become an addiction. Whereas kids that see it at 9, you know, they get sucked in, and it's just the perfect storm set up for addiction and for these other problems.
So, on that point, you mentioned the age of 9. Is there is there data on, how young people are being exposed to adult content now, and what has been that trend?
Okay, so there was first, I believe, in 2004, a study that said, 11 years old was the average age the kids were getting. That's 2004. That's before the iPhone. That's before the
Mhm.
iPad, which came out in the iPhone in 2007, the iPad in
Mhm.
2010, and all of this access through apps, through social media, all this access to pornography. So, I've heard people say that, oh, there's a study that showed that it was 9. Let me just tell you, this is a very difficult study to pin down. This is very difficult, like, data point to pin down, because what are you going to do? Go into a school and, talk to all the kindergartners, first graders, second grade. Have you seen
Yeah.
porn? Have you seen naked people online? Have you seen, you know, there's a point where the IRB, the organization that basically authorizes you to do
Right.
a study, um, will say yes to that. It's very difficult. So it's a number that, I've heard 9 is the average, but I've heard so many stories of 5-year-olds getting exposed to pornography on the school bus.
Mm.
7-year-olds getting exposed, in
Right.
class, uh, on the school computer. So, it's very difficult to say what the average age is. It's any kid that has access to the
Yes.
internet is vulnerable, and they should be warned. So when parents say, well, what's the age that I should start talking about
Mhm.
this? I say, well, what's the age that your kid has any access to the internet? And if that's 2, if that's 3, you need to start those gentle conversations, so that they know exactly, what to do when they see a quote unquote bad
Mhm.
picture, when they see um, pornography in any form. And otherwise, I mean, it's just, no kid deserves to face the porn industry
Mhm.
alone. And they
Mhm.
are, and they don't do well. I mean, I don't know about you, Christian, but when I'm caught off guard in a tricky situation by something totally
Mhm.
new, I don't tend to do very well if I'm not prepared. But kids that are prepared
Right.
have that ability to do
Right.
better, to make better choices, healthier choices to protect and defend their own brain, their one precious brain. And I have a couple of stories that kind of maybe I could share a couple
Please.
of stories that kind of bring this point home. So I got contacted by a mom. She had a 7-year-old daughter and some older kids, and she was watching for the summer a 10-year-old
Mhm.
boy. His mom was a single mom. She worked during the day. When school was out, she needed, childcare. So since their kids were friends, you know, she said, "Sure, I'll watch him for the summer." Well, the first month went by was totally fine, and then an incident happened where this 10-year-old boy took her 7-year-old daughter into the bathroom and started trying to do sexual things with her. And the 7-year-old had been warned. She was able to communicate with the mother about what had happened. The mother called the boy's mother up and told her, and this boy's mother, broke down in tears and said that 3 weeks prior, she had found on the
Mhm.
iPad that he was using, quote, pornography of every kind that he had been
Mm.
watching. So we don't know the exact timeline, but we do know that 3 weeks earlier, his mother had caught him watching this. And then 3 weeks later, after he was caught, he acted out on this young girl, this more vulnerable younger girl. So that's one case where you can see, um, and this is an anecdotal story, obviously, but but if you talk to, for example, if you talk to therapists, if you talk to people who work in child advocacy
Mhm.
centers, and those are the people that help, children who have been physically, sexually assaulted, um, you will find that they know that they see this correlation, that they see this tidal wave, coming and how it is fueled by pornography. Um, but then another story. So another couple
Mhm.
stories. A 6-year-old went with his family to a friend's home for dinner. And because this family was doing some
Mhm.
remodeling, they put all the kids' toys down in the basement, right near the stairs. And so the kids were allowed to go down, pick up a toy, come back up. So he was down there, looking for a toy, trying to figure out which one he wanted to play with, when a man who actually lived down there, was renting, came up to him, with his cell
Mhm.
phone and his smartphone, and showed this boy um, pornography, gay porn, and said, "Hey, this would be fun to do." And it was starting this kind of grooming process. This little boy knew exactly what it was. His mother had read him good pictures, bad pictures. He recognized that's
Mhm.
pornography and I should be looking at it. And I know exactly what to do. He turned away. He ran upstairs. He told his mom. Now, lots of kids get exposed to porn by perpetrators and they don't do that. They don't run immediately to their parent and tell because they haven't been taught to do that. But this boy was taught to do that, and I have so many more stories like this, but I just tell you that one, that the kids that are warned about pornography, because there's such a link between porn and child sexual abuse, that they are safer from abusive situations and know how to kind of nip those in the bud to get out of there and keep themselves safe. Um, One more story, a 9-year-old, his mom read him good pictures, bad pictures. So he knew what pornography is, why it's harmful, what to do when he sees it. 3 days later at school, a classmate, when they're on the playground, said, "Hey, look at this," and showed him pornography on his phone. And this child went home. He knew what it was.
Mhm. Mhm.
He recognized it. He wasn't caught off
Mhm.
guard. Of course, he was surprised by it, but he knew what was happening. He went to his mom and told her and said, you know, I was scared, but I knew what to do. I was scared, but I knew what to do. So I don't know what kind of porn this kid was being shown, but it was scary
Mhm.
to him. And he knew what to do as a result of being warned. So that's my message is like, talk to your kids early, give them a chance. There's so much evidence that if kids don't know um, what they're dealing with, they won't tell their parents. They just won't. Uh, I had one parent tell me that um, her kids, she went to pick them up from a play date. Another child was showing them a phone in the front yard. They got in the car and she goes, "Oh, what was she showing you on her phone?" And these kids who had not yet been
Mhm.
warned just looked at each other. They didn't even know how to describe what
Right.
they'd seen. And so they said, she was showing us a My Little Pony video. Well, months later, when this mom got a hold of Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, read it to her kids, they said, "Mom, she wasn't showing us My Little Pony. She was showing us pornography." And they lied because they simply didn't have the
Right.
vocabulary or the
Right. Right.
permission to talk about this. And so we need to give kids a vocabulary. We need to give them the
Mm.
permission to be open because this is a myth. If you think your kids are going to look at pornography and then come right to you um, and tell you what they saw, uh, there's just no evidence that that's going to happen unless you open that conversation first.
So it sounds like the having that proactive conversation is really the first step. And I want to couple that too with what we talked about in terms of seemingly decreasing age of first or potential first exposure. Again, it makes sense kind of intuitively because of the spread of technology. I will say anecdotally, I do remember when one of my co-founders and I were looking at some of your content and we did some research to see, like what is that first age nowadays? Because we're 30, we grew up with technology, like we're kind of on the beginning of this wave. And I seem to remember there was something that was relatively up to date that said like, you know, 40% or 50% of 13-year-old boys had been exposed to porn at some point. And we both immediately looked at each other and we're like, that's just completely false. It is
Yeah,
100%.
it is
Yeah,
100%. Yes.
yeah,
That's the thing. I feel like there is this disconnect, but the research is always trailing, because if they're going to talk to like 30-year-olds or 20-year-olds
sure.
now, now we're getting to the point where they can look back on their childhood and their childhood was, they did have an iPad. There's a disconnect with parents too,
Mm,
unfortunately. There's many studies that show that what they call this naivete gap. So what the parents, they underestimate the negative experiences their kids are
mm,
having on the internet. But they did a study recently at the British Board of Film Research. I think that's the name. They did a study where they asked a group of parents, you know, a lot of questions, but one of them was, have your kids seen
mm,
pornography? 25% said, yeah, I think they've seen pornography. 75% said
mm,
no. Okay. Well, then they asked those kids, like the kids of those
mhm,
parents, have you seen pornography? And it was twice as much as they
mhm,
thought. So it was like over 50%, 53, 58% of kids said, yeah, I've seen pornography. And we also know that, I mean, some kids are not going to admit it, but at least 53% of those kids said, yes, I've seen, which means this is a huge
right.
gap in parents' expectations. And it was even worse for girls.
Mm,
So we have this myth that girls are not interested in sex. That's a total
mm,
myth. It's just a cultural thing, It's like, oh, girls should not be interested in sex. Um, if they're good girls, if they're nice girls,
mhm,
Girls are just, can I just like newsflash? Girls are just as interested in sex as boys are.
Mhm.
Okay. They just culturally, are not supposed to show
Mhm.
that. So they do it in devious ways, but they get to it. They get to it. And a lot of girls come into porn through erotic, literature, but they almost always end up in, with video. 17% of the parents in that study said their daughters had seen porn when it was like
Mm.
58%. So again, we need to be more aware of what our kids, and I know it's hard because you don't want to think about
Right.
this. So many parents, we just love to hide our heads in the sand and think, well, my kid would
Right.
never do that.
Right.
My kid would not be interested in that. I've raised my child, whatever. I take my child to church every week,
Mhm.
whatever. No, if your child is a biological human and has access to
Yeah.
the internet, your child is at risk for seeing porn and being negatively
Mhm.
impacted. But again, there are things we can do about
Mhm.
this. We can begin to arm our children with a disposition to reject
Mhm.
pornography, with the ability, as they get to be 10, 11, 12, to be able to show them how porn sex is the exact opposite of healthy sex. I have articles about that on Defend Young Minds. And if we can have these conversations, you know, when they're very small, just to be protecting them so that they come to you and
Right.
tell you. Um, and I've had people say, "Well, your definition of porn for a kid is just nudity,"
Mhm.
you know, and that's not good. We don't want kids to, think their bodies are bad. I'm like, no, we say in the books, all parts of your body are good. Even your private parts are all
Mhm.
good. Um, but but it's not safe to show pictures of your private parts to others or look at that. Um, but I will tell you something, Christian. If your 5-year-old is seeing nudity
Mhm.
online, they're probably not looking at the Sistine Chapel. Okay, the
Sure.
ceiling, right? They're probably not looking at the statue of the
Mhm.
David. Um, they're probably seeing this content that you probably wouldn't want them to be
Right.
looking at. So we have to educate them so that they know exactly what to do when they see it. And then you can be there
Mhm.
with them. You can be helping to shape that
Mhm.
disposition so that they understand where this is going to lead. Now they still have their choice, um, and if you want to have all the filters, but you can't raise your kids
Right.
in a bubble. You don't want to, but you want to raise them with the ability to make these healthier choices for their one precious brain.